In September 1958, a bank in California made a decision so reckless it should have destroyed the credit card forever. Bank of America mailed thousands of live, active cards to ordinary households in Fresno. No applications, no credit checks, no warnings, just free spending power arriving in mailboxes. What followed was not innovation, it was chaos wearing a plastic disguise. The experiment was called the Fresno Drop. Around 60,000 active Bank Americard cards were pushed into the hands of people who never asked for them. To executives, it looked like a shortcut to mass adoption. To criminals, it looked like an unlocked vault. Suddenly, credit was not something people earned. It was something sitting on front porches waiting to be stolen. The disaster moved fast. Fraud exploded. Forged signatures piled up. Delinquency rates reportedly reached 22%. Some people spent money they could not repay. Others stole cards that were never meant for them. Organized crime rings even targeted warehouses full of unissued cards. A product designed to create convenience had accidentally created a new kind of financial crime. Bank of America lost up to $20 million. The creator of the project, Joseph Williams, was fired. Executives tried to bury the embarrassment, but the mistake had already escaped the building. The strangest part is that this failure did not end the credit card. It became the ugly foundation for one of the most powerful payment empires in history. That is the mystery at the center of Visa. A product born from fraud, chaos, and bad judgment somehow became a global machine processing trillions of dollars. Today, Visa sits between consumers, banks, merchants, governments, and online businesses. But most people misunderstand what it actually does. They see the logo on the card and assume Visa is lending them money. That assumption is wrong. Visa does not issue most cards. Visa does not lend you the balance. Visa does not take the default risk if a customer cannot pay. If someone runs up massive debt and fails, the pain usually lands on the issuing bank. Visa's genius is different. It gets paid for moving the message, not carrying the debt. So how does a company that lends no money, takes no credit risk, and owns no store still make billions? The answer is simple, but powerful. Visa is not a bank. It is a toll booth. Every swipe, tap, checkout, and online purchase sends information through a network, and somewhere inside that invisible route, Visa collects a tiny fee. Tiny fees do not sound impressive until you understand the scale. Billions of transactions pass through the system. Each one is small, fast, and almost invisible, but multiplied across the world, those fractions become a fortune. That is why Visa's empire does not look like a bank vault. It looks like infrastructure, quiet, embedded, everywhere. In the late 1960s, that empire almost collapsed before it became unstoppable. Thousands of banks were using competing card systems. Paper receipts flooded branches. Fraud was out of control. Customers were confused. Merchants were frustrated. Banks argued over rules, losses, and responsibility. The dream of universal payments was drowning in its own paperwork. The man who helped save it was not a famous Wall Street titan. His name was D. Hock. He was a college dropout, a restless thinker, and a man who had once sat in a parked car across from an unemployment office during a dark period of his life. He was not supposed to redesign global finance, but he saw what bankers missed. Hock understood the core problem. Banks wanted to compete, but the card system required cooperation. A payment network only works if everyone trusts the same rules. Merchants need consistency. Banks need settlement. Customers need acceptance. Fraud needs control. Hock's radical idea was to build an organization that was neither fully centralized nor completely chaotic. He called the idea chaotic, a mix of chaos and order. To traditional executives, it sounded strange, but the card system needed exactly that balance. Too much control would make banks resist. Too little control would let fraud destroy everything. Hock proposed a shared network owned by member banks, governed by rules, but strong enough to scale globally. In 1970, National Bank Americard Inc. was created. Bank of America gave up direct control and the network became a cooperative structure owned by participating banks. That decision was crucial. It turned a messy bank product into a shared financial platform. The system could now grow beyond one company, one state, and eventually one country. But a system needs more than structure. It needs a name people can trust. In 1976, Bank Americard became Visa. The name was short, simple, and global. It sounded like permission to enter. It could fit on cards, signs, receipts, and storefronts. The brand was no longer tied to one bank. It became a passport for payments. Then came the technology. Visa built electronic systems that could authorize transactions in seconds and settle them later through digital processes. Before that, cards created mountains of paper. Authorization was slower, messier, and easier to abuse. By turning payment approval into electronic messaging, Visa made cards feel instant. Speed became trust. Every modern Visa transaction follows a loop most customers never see. A cardholder taps, a merchant requests approval, the acquiring bank sends the message into the network, the issuing bank checks the account, Visa routes the information and returns the answer. To the customer, it feels like magic. Behind the screen, it is coordinated financial choreography. That is why Visa's power is hidden. It does not need to own the bank, the store, or the customer. It owns the route. The network decides how information travels, how transactions are authorized, and how trust moves between strangers. In a world where commerce depends on speed, the company controlling the route becomes incredibly valuable. Visa's model became powerful because it was asset-light. Banks carried the credit risk. Merchants handled products. Consumers created the spending. Visa provided the network and collected fees. That meant the business could scale without opening branches, stocking shelves, or taking deposits. It was not selling money. It was selling access to trusted movement. That is how fractions become billions. A single fee may be tiny, but when transactions happen across supermarkets, airlines, hotels, fuel stations, restaurants, apps, and online stores, the numbers compound. Visa does not need one huge payment. It needs endless, ordinary payments. The empire is built from moments so small customers barely notice them. This is also why Visa became so profitable. Once the network exists, each additional transaction can move at huge scale. The infrastructure is expensive to build, but powerful once established. Revenue grows with activity. Costs do not rise the same way. That is how Visa built margins that many ordinary banks could never dream of matching. But dominance brought enemies. Merchants began asking why they had to pay so much just to accept cards. Retail giants fought over swipe fees. Banks argued over who deserved the economics. Regulators watched more closely. Visa had created a system everyone depended on, but dependency creates resentment. Once a network becomes essential, every fee becomes political. The company's defenders argue that the fees pay for security, reliability, fraud control, and global acceptance. Critics argue that merchants have little choice because customers expect cards to work everywhere. That tension sits beneath every tap. The transaction feels frictionless to the buyer. But behind it, merchants and networks are fighting over who pays for convenience. Visa also learned that trust is not only technical, it is emotional. People needed to believe a card would work anywhere. Merchants needed to believe accepting it would increase sales. Banks needed to believe the network would settle properly. That trust became a brand. And once the brand became global, the blue and gold logo started acting like a financial passport. One of Visa's boldest moves came through sports. When American Express passed on Olympic sponsorship, Visa stepped in. The Olympics gave Visa a global stage and a powerful message. If you wanted to participate in the world's biggest events, you needed the card that worked there. Marketing turned payment acceptance into status. While the brand grew louder, D-Hock stepped away quietly. He eventually left leadership and lived far from the financial machine he helped design. That contrast is strange. The man who helped create one of the most important payment networks did not become the face of a billionaire empire. The system became famous. The architect became almost invisible. In 2008, Visa went public in a massive IPO. The timing was almost unbelievable. Wall Street was entering crisis. Bear Stearns had collapsed. Fear was spreading through financial markets, yet Visa's offering raised billions and became one of the largest US IPOs of its time. While banks were bleeding, the payment network looked different. That difference mattered. Visa was connected to banks, but it was not a normal bank. It did not depend on mortgage securities the same way. It did not carry the same credit losses. It was a network business. The crisis exposed the weakness of leveraged finance, but it also showed the strength of toll booth models built on transaction flow. The modern Visa empire is built on speed, trust, and scale. A transaction must feel instant. A merchant must trust the approval. A bank must trust the settlement. A customer must trust the experience. If any part breaks, the illusion disappears. But when it works, people stop thinking about money moving at all. That invisibility is the real power. Cash feels physical. You see it leave your hand. Cards and phones feel lighter. They reduce the pain of paying. That changes behavior. Consumers often spend more when payment feels effortless. Visa does not need to force anyone to spend. It helps create a world where spending feels almost frictionless, but a frictionless world creates uncomfortable questions. If paying becomes too easy, who benefits from the extra spending? Merchants get sales, banks get fees and interest, networks get volume, consumers get convenience but sometimes less awareness. The system feels clean on the surface because the pain is hidden behind a tap. Technology is now pushing the system beyond plastic. Card numbers are being replaced with tokens, phones and watches are becoming wallets, online checkouts are becoming one-click experiences. The card may disappear from your hand, but that does not mean Visa disappears. The company wants to remain inside the transaction even when the plastic is gone. Tokenization is powerful because it makes payments safer. Instead of exposing the original card number, the system can use a digital substitute. If stolen, the token is less useful to criminals. To consumers, this feels invisible. To the network, it is strategic. The safer the system becomes, the more transactions can move through it. Visa is also moving into digital wallets, real-time payments, and new settlement experiments. The goal is not just to protect the card business. It is to stay relevant wherever money moves next. Whether the payment starts from plastic, phone, app, or token, Visa wants the same position it has always wanted, the trusted middle. That creates a bigger question. Is Visa just a useful payments company, or has it become a private layer of global financial infrastructure? Most people never vote on payment rails, they just use them. But once a network sits between billions of buyers and sellers, its rules quietly shape commerce itself. The irony is that Visa began with disorder. The Fresno Drop was messy, costly and embarrassing. Fraud nearly poisoned the idea before it matured. But that failure forced banks to learn the lesson that made the network possible. Payments require rules. Without trust, cards are dangerous. With trust, they become one of the most scalable businesses on earth. D. Hock's genius was not designing a card. It was designing a system where rivals could cooperate without surrendering completely. That is much harder than building a product. Products can be copied. Networks are harder. Once enough banks, merchants, and consumers join, the system becomes self-reinforcing. Everyone uses it because everyone else uses it. That is why Visa is difficult to disrupt. A new competitor needs technology, but technology alone is not enough. It needs banks, merchants, fraud systems, legal agreements, consumer trust, brand recognition, and global acceptance. Visa's moat is not one wall. It is thousands of relationships layered on top of each other. Still, no empire is untouchable. Regulators can challenge fees. Merchants can fight costs. New technologies can change behavior. Governments can build instant payment rails. Crypto and stablecoins can test new settlement models. Visa's future depends on whether it can keep adapting without losing the position that made it powerful. Standing invisibly between payer and payee. The secret of Visa is that it does not need to be noticed to be powerful. It works best when nobody thinks about it. The card taps, the approval appears, the receipt prints, the order ships, and behind that ordinary second, banks, merchants, data centers, fraud systems, and settlement rules move in perfect sequence. Visa began as a reckless experiment that nearly collapsed under fraud. It survived because one broken system was redesigned into a network of trust. And today, every swipe tells the same story. The plastic may seem ordinary, the fee may seem tiny, But multiplied across the world, that tiny moment becomes an empire hiding in plain sight. If you enjoyed the story of the secret empire of Visa, how every card swipe makes billions, then you'll love the story of the fall of Bear Stearns, the collapse that started the 2008 financial crisis. Click the video on your screen now. I'll see you there.